Got it. All right, we are trickling in. Fantastic. All right, I find myself getting stuck reading names. Welcome, everyone. Thrilled to have everyone here. Thank you for taking is it Wednesday? Is it Thursday? Teachers don't know days of the week in the summer. It's Wednesday, right? Nicole, back me up. It's Wednesday. All right, welcome. You are here because you are already well aware that there has been state legislation aimed at improving reading and how it's taught and how it's been changing in the instructional landscape in the country's elementary schools. We are lucky enough that there has been an analysis conducted by the Albert Shanker Institute with a think tank, Read Across America, that is affiliated with the American Federation of Teachers. They have been very hard at work, and we are lucky and blessed that they are here to educate us and enlighten us and listen to us and answer some questions. So I would like to begin with starting to introduce the think tank itself, if that's okay. So I hope that if you don't already, if you would please unmic all of my Shanker Report authors. But to begin with is Susan Newman. If you want to say hi, Susan, so we can all
Hi.
Hi. So I also have to be completely transparent. We met today and we talked about bios, and there's much more left on the cutting room floor that I'm actually sharing. So please know this is the Reader's Digest, very much condensed version of their bios. In any event, Susan Newman is a professor of childhood and early literacy at the New York University Steinhardt School of Culture, Education, and Human Development.
Right.
Previously served as Assistant Secretary of Elementary Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. I did just say U.S. Department of Education. So if you want to back up and say, did she just? I did actually say U.S. Department of Education during the George W. Bush administration. She's an accomplished author. And I just have to interject a personal thing here, Susan. Your study on the equalizing the background for the WUG study was one of the most impactful studies that I'd ever read. And
Thank you.
It made me cry. And Nicole's going to put that study in the chat. And essentially when I read that, it's all about, equity and inequity and background knowledge. But when I read it, I went, okay, that settles that. So on a personal note, I can't believe I have the opportunity to thank you personally for that, but personally, very much thank you. So also, we are lucky enough to have Mary Catherine Ricker, again, cutting room floor, most of her bio is there. Mary Catherine is a national board certified middle school English language arts teacher who served as Minnesota's Commissioner of Education as Executive Vice President of the American Federation of Teachers and as President of the St. Paul Federation of Teachers, Local 28. Prior to her leadership outside of the classroom, she was a classroom teacher for 13 years in Minnesota, Washington State, and South Korea. That's fascinating.
Hey, everyone.
Esther Quintero. Oh, please do. I'm sorry, Mary Catherine, if you would just actually say hi and use your voice so that we can see you.
Absolutely. Hey, everybody. And thank you so much for the invitation to be here tonight. Looking forward to it.
Fantastic. And next is Esther Quintero, has a PhD in sociology from Cornell University and has been a senior fellow with the Albert Shanker Institute for over 10 years. She's the editor of Teaching in Context, published by Harvard Education. And of course, she's one of the authors of the report. So if you want to just say hi for us.
Hi, everybody.
Nice being
And she
here.
has two little kids that she's trying to put down to sleep, so we all can.
So I'm going to unmic.
Worship with that, right? And good luck
That's
with that. That's probably your biggest task tonight, I would think.
exactly. My husband's biggest task.
As it should be. I just saw Cheryl Polito clapping for the husband. Love that, Cheryl. And last but not least, and I always say last but not least because I'm the youngest of 8 and last is never least. Kayla Reist was secretary of ELA, was a secondary ELA teacher for 9 years before coming to the Albert Shanker Institute as a research fellow. She's starting a PhD in curriculum and instruction at the University of Virginia this fall. So these bios are certainly worth taking a second to let in. Very impressive, very impressive. And we are lucky that we will just learn from each and every one of you tonight. I am Virginia Quinn Mooney, and I have somehow stumbled upon this incredible opportunity to continue to move science of reading forward. I am a moderator, group expert on the What I Should Have Been Taught in College Facebook page. That was an opportunity that I will forever be grateful to Donna Height-Maddock for. Again, everything is just to move things forward for reading. So everything we do is to move things forward for reading. It's not sexy, it's not, but it's important. I also have my newest co-pilot that she and I just connected about 2 weeks ago. Her name is Nicole Rizzo, and she is a former Connecticut teacher and literacy specialist. And she's currently working with a nonprofit publisher, Open Up Resources. So the boring part, the housekeeping, if you would not mind keeping your microphone off for now, that's an important caveat, just for now. We certainly want to hear from people as we move forward. But if you have not already, please put into chat your name, where you're from, possibly what role do you play in education? And most importantly, as always, this is a virtual happy hour. So, what are you drinking? Could be tea to Tito's. I always say I will never be accused of advocating only alcohol, but let us know who you are so that we can all start to get acquainted with one another. It is important that you are heard, and as you're listening and as we're learning, please feel free to share in the chat what it looks like for you in the classroom, or what it looks like for you in the administrative role. The authors of the report, the 4 women that I just introduced, this is very much, they are just as much interested in learning from you as they want to impart information to you. Whatever they learn from you, they will take it and they will continue to do big, big things with it. So don't ever hesitate to throw any of your thoughts into chat. It will make us all better. And we are the boots on the ground, and this is who they would like to hear from. We will, the way that this is the way that I envision this tonight and the way that this will go is there is so much information. They have worked so hard for so long, and we will be lucky enough to just learn from them and hear how and what they did. And then when we're all done, then we'll jump into the questions. But again, doesn't mean you shouldn't type it when you have the thought. That's what I do. If I don't type it when I'm thinking about it, it's probably never going to happen. So don't be shy, type away. I am going to bounce it off now to Mary Catherine, and she's going to give us a little bit of an intro into the Albert Shanker Institute and exactly why the research came to be. So Mary Catherine, we are ready for you.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this. Thank you, everybody who is taking time out of your Wednesday night to hear from us. And we'll make sure to drop some links in the chat so you can dig in even more. Before we hear from our incredible researchers, I wanted to set the stage a little bit to tell you the why. Like, why did we do this? Out of all the reading research we could have, sort of sunk our teeth into, why did we decide to survey state legislation? And it really comes down to sort of the narrative, the need, and the opportunity. And I will start with the narrative because I would say this is the thing that was concerning us the most. We were hearing this narrative in a lot of reading articles that were coming out, or in some of the discussions or even debates that started veering toward this like blame teacher, maybe even blame school of education sort of narrative. And we felt like that sort of had echoes of sort of like that bad teacher narrative from the last decade that really stifled a lot of what we thought could have been sort of the productive conversation to strengthen teaching and learning. So that's where like that narrative concern came from. But then also let's talk a little bit about need. We also recognized that historically, a lot of the discussion around reading was pre-K through 3 for all the right reasons. There was this hyper focus on strengthening reading instruction pre-K through 3. And we recognized that in that need that left a lot of student populations out. And we were seeing this great energy in the community of advocates for students with dyslexia. And we thought of our 4th through 12th graders who, if you're still struggling to read, you need strong supports. We thought of our adult learners. There are adult education programs that need a strong reading component. We thought of our English language learners who are juggling a lot of learning at once, including reading English, perhaps reading in a home language, and perhaps reading in additional languages for our multilingual learners. So there was this need out there to really assess the landscape and how were students, all of these important student groups being represented. And then this opportunity. And we truly felt, and you're going to hear this from the researchers, there was an opportunity to set a landscape that welcomes everyone to the work to strengthen reading instruction. My colleague, Esther, who you're going to hear from shortly, early on coined the phrase a learning agenda that I then adopted constantly every time we met to discuss this work and keep shaping the research. Said, how is this contributing to that learning agenda where we all feel welcomed to give our contribution, and we all feel like as soon as we accomplish something to strengthen reading instruction, we look for that next thing, that next inspiration, that next step we can take. Recognizing that not all of our steps need to come via state legislation. But I will close by saying we also recognized, we picked up on a trend happening. We were seeing state legislatures who, I can speak as a commissioner of education, honor local control, and yet these state legislatures were stepping in and setting statewide expectations, and that caught our attention. And so those are those are the big whys that drove this research agenda. And I'm really looking forward to having my colleagues now share what the research findings were.
Mary Catherine, I loved when you talked about setting the landscape to strengthen, and that Esther refers to it as the learning agenda. And I know that there's a lot of positives, and I love that your emphasis is on the positives. So Esther, if you wouldn't mind joining us and letting us know more about that.
Absolutely. And I have a cold, so I'm not sounding my best for sure. I apologize for that, but I'll try to sound as best as I can. So I'm going to share a little bit about how we did the work, the parameters that we were guided by, and then a little bit about the findings. And again, we want to sort of leave room for conversation. So I'll try to keep it sort of brief. As you can see in this slide, basically we looked at 4 years of data. We looked at 2019 to 2022, and it's our intention going forward to look at 2023 and because there's been a lot going on this year in terms of reading legislation. But the database currently has 223 bills across 46 states, and 3 different people read these bills to make sure that we were all seeing the same things. Basically, we identified areas of interest that I'm going to show in the next slide, but not yet. And then 3 different researchers looked at these bills, identifying, are these things present in the bills? Are they not? And so we wanted to be very systematic and very granular in terms of what we were sort of putting into this database. So if we go, and the map, so we're having here a map showing kind of like the intensity of this legislative activity, you know, the darker blue states like Utah and Virginia, you know, pass the most number of bills. But as you see, there are, you know, 46 states that passed at least one bill and only 5 that didn't. So there's been a lot going on in terms of reading legislation in the past 4 years. So these priority areas or 40 areas that you saw in the previous slide, we group them in 4 categories. We talk about, you know, how reading is defined in these bills, you know, what's in the bills about teachers and teacher supports, you know, things like teacher preparation, curriculum, professional development. Another third area is student supports, and this includes things like assessment, you know, whether or not there are things like after school programs, summer school, tutoring, whether the bills talk about students with dyslexia, English learners. So this is all about students. And then the fourth sort of area or bucket refers to family and community supports. We look at things like parent notification, you know, family engagement, community engagement, and culturally responsive practices. This gives you a sense of, you know, the sort of topics that we looked at, but there's more that we looked at that is in the report and in our website. And then I'm going to sort of walk you through some of the key findings, and some of these findings really go against the grain in terms of like what the narrative is. And so we like to highlight why that is, and you know, sort of how they challenge that conventional wisdom. The first thing that caught our attention, and we had no idea walking into the analysis what we were going to find. In fact, if you had asked some of us, we thought, okay, so yeah, we're hearing a lot about phonics. You know, it's very likely that we'll see a lot of attention being paid to phonics in these bills. And that was not the case. You know, we saw attention being paid to the 5 pillars of reading. There was nothing in the bill in the bills indicating that phonics was getting prioritized for the most part, you know. So I think I'm going to look a little bit at my notes to give you sort of the states that are doing what. And in my notes, I have that 34 states are talking about those 5 pillars. So 34 out of 46. The second finding is that this legislation really is broader and affects more students than previous reforms. And Susan's really gonna talk more about that and put that in context. But according to our calculations, we calculated that this legislation roughly will affect about 90% of students in K through 3 across the United States. I saw in the chat, someone shared a question about pre-K. And for example, that's something that sets this legislation apart from previous efforts, because there are 31 states that actually include pre-kindergarten in their bills. And 37 states include charter schools explicitly in the legislation. So we see a much broader sort of effort here. The third idea, the third takeaway, if you will, is that, you know, teachers are really at the center of this legislation, and that is good and bad, as we will see later. It's good because, you know, we do need, you know, better teacher preparation and professional development. And those are 2 main levers that we see in these bills. There are 38 states talk about teacher preparation and 40 states talk about professional development. So these are really key areas. But then again, we're going to share later what else we need in addition to, you know, this focus on teachers. A nice surprise was how the legislation talks about families. And in the past, we've seen legislation talk about parent notification, you know, the idea that parents are going to be notified of student results in tests and assessments. But we saw a lot of states in this set of bills that go beyond that and talk about the role of families in enhancing literacy in their children. There are 38 states that talk in some level of detail about this, about involving families in children's literacy. So we were very gladly surprised about this finding. The fifth idea is so most states, I think it's all but 4 states of those 46 that had legislation, passed bills that in one way or another talked about the need to draw on evidence and science. You know, some of the states use science of reading, some of the states use evidence-based, science-based. We sort of took them all to sort of mean something similar, you know, the idea that decisions need to be guided by our best knowledge, you know, and that is also a finding that we thought was very positive. And last but not least, you know, we've heard how sometimes this is politicized, like a lot of things, and this legislation, we really saw that states across the political spectrum were highlighting, we're showing leadership in literacy. And Kayla's going to show, is going to illustrate, she's going to walk you through our dashboard and some of our data to illustrate this last point, and also highlight a couple of spotlight states that we spotlighted for one area or another. So Kayla.
Hi, everyone. So like Esther said, I am going to walk us through the website and database that we created. And so when you click on the link, which they are putting the link in the chat, you will find our executive summary. And then over here on the side, you will find resources and data. I'm going to highlight our full report and policy recommendations as 2 areas where you should definitely look. But I'm actually going to walk you through the Explore data.
We're seeing another screen, Kayla.
Oh,
we're seeing
you're
just
not-
the main sort of.
Okay. Let me start sharing again. Are we there now?
Yep, that's good.
Perfect. I ruined my Vanna White moment. So this right here is the data that we found during our research. And like Esther said, I'm going to just show you 2 of the states that we thought were exemplars in different areas. So the first one is Alaska. And if you hover over Alaska, you'll see that 10 of 17 priority areas were talked about in their legislation. And something that really stood out to us was family engagement. And you'll notice that there's a check mark for family engagement. And this bill that Alaska created, it specifically talked about districts sending home at-home reading plans with strategies and resources to help families help their students read. It also talked about the Parents as Teachers program, and this program was for students 5 and under, and it was really just a curriculum for parents to help their young children with literacy and language development. And then also Alaska really focused on adult literacy, so helping parents improve their own literacy skills and then in turn help their students. And then another state that I want to highlight that we found to be an exemplar would be Utah. As Esther mentioned, this legislation talks a lot about teachers, but we were really curious, where do school leaders fall into that? And Susan will talk about that in a bit, but Utah is one of those states where the school leadership was really highlighted. So for example, in Utah, school leaders, so school principals, they had to do science of reading professional development. And then the principals had to create partnerships and work collaboratively with reading coaches to support and advocate for teachers to get PD in the science of reading, but also to find the time to implement this PD in their classrooms. So that is just one of those states that stood out to us as talking about school leadership in a more complex way. Another cool thing about our website is, for example, if you go down here to the key, you will see that the states that are white, they have not passed a lot of legislation in all these areas. However, the red states, for example, Michigan, those have covered reading extensively. So if you click on Michigan, 14 out of 17 priority areas covered. And then if you click on the state, you can also go and read the bills yourself if you're interested. And then the explore data by priority area. If you want to take a deeper dive into specific areas of reading, for example, writing, you will see that the gray states are ones that have not mentioned it, and then the blue states are ones that have mentioned writing in their legislation. So this is just a little bit about our website and how you can go in and explore what your state is doing for reading.
Kayla, can you give a quick example of a code where we had the 1-2?
Yeah, for sure. So for some states, we coded it as 0-1-2. 0 means that the legislation just did not talk about the topic or the feature. A 1 is that it was mentioned, and then a 2 was it was discussed in depth. So for example, curriculum. The gray states are ones that curriculum was not mentioned in their legislation. The light blue would be that curriculum was mentioned, but not too in depth. And then the dark blue is that that state explained curriculum in a detailed manner. And then white states just did not pass legislation. All right, and I'm going to get the PowerPoint back on. And Susan is going to start next.
I'm really impressed, Kayla. That's really good.
I guess you got your Vanna White status back.
Thank you. Thank you.
Susan gifted that back to you, among all the things
Thank
she's.
you.
So thanks, Kayla, and all of you. So one of the things I'd just like to highlight some of the summary comments that we have heard, but just bullet them in some ways. And I think what is exciting here is this is the biggest and the boldest effort in our history to shape reading instruction. As Virginia mentioned, I was very involved in the Reading First initiative, which was a $6 billion initiative. And what we had hoped in that effort was to really change the nature of reading from something that is based on good old wives' tales to a science. And we called it a scientifically based approach to reading. And as many of you know, it hit some areas very, very well, but other areas it did not. And so this is our sort of second generation an effort to really ensure that we provide scientifically based instruction for children. So it is state-driven as opposed to Reading First, which was a federally funded towards state initiative. And in that way, it really contrasts sharply with Reading First in that states are taking the lead. We also found across the context, great variation and adaptation across states. And this is something that is important because in the Reading First, what we found is that states would often copycat one another. They would take the legislation in one area, just apply it to another state. Yet some states had a real, involved state Board of Education. Others have very limited resources in which to really enact this kind of legislation. So here the variation seems to be better adapted to the state in which it's designed, which is a good thing. And then finally, the legislation is nonpartisan. So we began by seeing many of the red states, frankly, adopting science reading kinds of legislation, but that has moved as Kayla and Esther have shown, so that most states, other than 5 in my own state, New York, has legislation in reading. Next slide. So we also found room to grow, and I'd like to highlight some of the things that really are ways in which I think teachers might have a voice and really contribute to the ongoing conversation about reading reform. The first is that this legislation is largely about reading. Now, that may not bother many people, but most of us talk about literacy. We focus on the importance of background knowledge and oral language development and writing. And all of that is sorely missing in much of this legislation. They talk about the 5 pillars, but those 5 pillars were identified in 2020, in 2000, 2001. A whole lot of research has been done since then. So, for example, we know that writing is incredibly important for children to express themselves and encode information. We also know that oral language is imperative. So someone in the chat was saying, well, what about pre-K? And we know that oral language, for example, is the language of instruction for young children who are just beginning their schooling. The second thing that we know is that assessment is prioritized. Again, we've talked about data-driven decision-making, but one of the things that is a little bit troubling is that we don't see much support for what do you do with that assessment. So in other words, we might assess children, but then what kind of additional supports are really available for teachers and for children to use if they find that they're struggling readers. And we don't find a comprehensive set of supports. Very often the states will focus on one thing, might be multi-tiered instruction, but they don't think about the other things that really are critical, like bilingual education. There's uneven attention to student groups. So we see little attention to English learners, yet most of us are working with children who are second language or multi-language learners. There is greater emphasis on dyslexia, but I caution people because dyslexia is a neurological issue that affects only 10% of our children. Many readers and reading problems are really about struggling readers, those children who have not had an instructional program that they really need. And so typologizing children and saying that they're dyslexic when they may only have a reading difficulty, I think is highly problematic. The fourth issue I'd like to focus is that teachers are the target here. And many of you know that who are on this website. This is a good thing in that we know how important teachers are. But at the same time, it can be a negative thing because we don't want to see a blame game. For example, if some things don't happen in the school, is it because of the teacher? Or is it because that there's an infrastructure that is missing in that school? One of the things that we noted is that there was limited attention to instructional leadership. These are people who will go into the classroom, will not evaluate teachers, but will analyze what's going on in the classroom and provide support for that teacher and not, dismiss them as being a failing teacher. So one of the things that we want to see is more instructional leadership and more critical supports. Related to that, we find often that there's professional development on the 5 pillars, but they're completely separate from curriculum. So teachers are learning about this generic scientific approach to literacy, but not how to implement that actually in the classroom. And that's critical for teachers. As Kayla and Esther mentioned, there's more attention to families and communities, but there's still not enough in our view. Parents are incredibly important. They're the ones who have shouted and screamed that their children need more attention in reading. And we also know that our librarians and other community supporters can be so helpful in really improving children's opportunities. And finally, it's going to take, we might see these great laws on the books. They might look good to us, and we acknowledge that right here now. But you and I know that it's going to take an implementation that is very, very careful, that teachers will need time. We cannot have a pendulum shift again and again, and that there are some issues like banning books and restrictive provisions that are just really troubling to the teaching profession. So we need to honor our teachers, recognize that they are the center of this reading reform, and provide them with the supports that they really need. So with that, I'm going to turn it to Esther and recommendations for the future. And then we hope to take your questions and comments.
Actually, I believe Mary Catherine was going to offer some.
Oh, sorry, Esther. Mary
some
Catherine, you're on.
final, yeah.
Well, and thank you so much. And I will keep it quick because I know like we're excited about jumping into the conversation too. But I know one of the things we wanted to stress was that this, we are seeing reading legislation be taken up by state legislatures across the country. And we wrote this as a survey of that state legislation, but we wrote it in a way, and you're going to hear from Esther about some of the recommendations too, that this can be a tool for anyone at any level who wants to strengthen reading instruction. We want this research to be brought to your school building, and maybe you have a site staff development team, and you could use this to just talk about, if the state hasn't acted, how do you strengthen reading instruction based on what you're seeing from some of these exemplars or by some of the recommendations yourself right now? Bring it to a labor management team. If your union has a labor management collaboration team at the district level, you could bring it there and you could say, let's use this document as, again, our learning agenda for strengthening reading instruction. And you can use it to advocate at the state level too. Some of these exemplars showing, states that have made some really interesting strides in meaningful family engagement or meaningful community engagement, for example. You may want your state to consider something like that. For this piece of research to sort of jump off the page and become your advocacy tool to strengthen reading instruction, it doesn't have to just be at the state legislative level. It can be wherever you feel like you've got an avenue of influence. This can be the document that helps do that for you.
Mary Catherine, in listening to you and talking about how the support can be systemized, I wonder now, were you done? I did not just cut you off, did I?
Perfect. No,
All that's good in this world. I did not just, okay, good. I'm hoping and I'm curious that if some of the participants who are in different roles, if you're not sure what you can do to help systemize it, maybe you can just let us know your role, and maybe this panel can, point you in the right direction or give you some food for thought, how in each of our roles we can do exactly what was just suggested.
I love that idea. And I love, whether it is sort of even just doing some brainstorming in the chat, and other ways of, what it's going to take to build the critical mass to again strengthen reading instruction, to bring about some of these ideas that we're seeing being incubated in other places, as well as some of the recommendations you're going to hear Esther talk about, that perhaps need greater incubation in many more places.
And it looks different, there's so many hats here tonight, I assume, and it's different for each and every role that we play.
That's right.
I don't want to take away too much from the discussion, but I think, and this document, by the way, is in the website that Kayla showed. You can click on it and download it. I'll say a couple of things. One key takeaway, and I think you've heard us all get to it from different angles. One key recommendation is, think about the system, think about the infrastructure, especially when it comes to teachers. States are doing a great thing by focusing on, professional development and teacher preparation, although I say a great thing, but we know this varies by context, and how it's implemented is important. And we're hearing from educators that it's going better in some places than another. So I don't want to minimize that, but in general, it's a good idea to to give teachers the opportunity to sort of have access to this science of reading knowledge. However, if they don't have other critical supports like curriculum and leadership and, time in their day to do these things, and, all these other pieces have to fit together. Attention to how these things are aligned and how they are coherent, those are really kind of what it boils down to when it comes to doing things on the ground. And we hear from educators about how there's a mismatch and, things don't always align, and there's a lot of loose ends in that way. So our recommendation is, pay attention to these things, and these things matter, because it's not about individual teachers, doing this work. It's about how the conditions enable them to do this work, to implement this knowledge, to do this new kind of instruction. The second piece that I'll talk about is this idea of science, science of reading. And I think one key sort of takeaway that we want to highlight in these recommendations is, science is something that changes and evolves, and, keep learning about this, keep asking questions, and this is something that we also have in the recommendations, like it's not settle, it's not, we keep learning, and that is important to keep an open mind about, what about this knowledge and this growing body of research. And finally, really like work with educators. And we didn't see this, we have this in the final recommendations because there wasn't a lot in the bills about how educators are to be involved. Some of the bills have things about have teachers on panels, but there could be more in there about how legislators and legislators and experts and educators work together. And I think these, if we had more of that, I think we would see less of the, top-down banning type of thing that it's just not, I don't think it would go well with anyone. So it's not surprising that educators are pushing back against these sorts of things, and it's not even about 3Qing sometimes, it's about, just the very idea of banning something, banning a practice. It doesn't have to come to that. And we think there's a better way. So we have some pieces in the recommendations about, try to work collaboratively and respectfully with educators and families.
Esther and Virginia, I'd love to hear from teachers about whether they're excited about these changes and whether how their professional development experiences have worked so far.
Susan, I'm more than happy to start that conversation off. I've been teaching for 20 years, and I always go back to Emily Hanford's first quote in her podcast of there's some teachers that always knew and there was some teachers that sold a story. I am the primary. I've always known that we needed to, keep eyes on letters. And I came into science of reading, and I'm forever grateful that I did, but I didn't realize that I was dipping my toe in it all these years, but I always was. And once I started to learn about it, I went directly to my teachers, the teacher next door, my best friends. To the one, everyone understood that it's just the direct systemic instruction. And, there were leaders that kept saying it's messy and it takes time. And I always refer to us as boots on ground. Boots on grounds, we're like, nope. We were looking at the result. We were looking at the results real time. And, I teach first grade, and I ended the school year with, I changed the words to summer nights and to all about like blending and segmenting and whatever. And the kids ended the song with, I can't believe I'm about to sing. Y'all, if you want to plug your ears, I totally understand. Full disclosure, I can't sing. Can't believe I just opened this door. But it ended with, 18 of my first graders saying, that sound is a schwa. And it's the middle schoolers that came to watch, and they were all looking at each other, go, what's a schwa? But if you teach them, they know.
Yeah.
It's just been amazing. And I think, Esther and I talked about this a little bit today, how I adore Brent Conway and I adore his message. And he was saying how one teacher can make that difference, but a leader can make, this difference. And it's, as a teacher, how do we help with this part of it? To bring in the
Good point.
whole of the sum.
What's
But-
taken us so long?
Well, and Susan, it's funny, one of the questions that I had for you, what's your thought? You had mentioned pendulum swing, and having a conversation with Emily, who had just finished up a conversation with Mark Seidenberg, she was saying that he's not positive that we're here yet. Like, I feel like we are here, we are not going back, we are direct instruction, knowledge, content-rich curriculum. What's your thought? Do you feel like we are going to continue to move in the direction, or do you feel like it really may swing back someday to the holistic approach?
Well, I think, I'm glad you asked, because one of the reasons that I've been on this report and various webcasts is because I think we can't go back. We cannot go back. Our children are not doing as well as we hope. And I'm sure you're among many others who have gone into the classroom and say, these children are so talented and so smart. Why are they struggling in reading? There is no reason that so many children should be failing. So what I think we need is a national conversation in a collective, saying that we're not going to allow this to continue to happen. And we have naysayers out there, Virginia. I mean, I hate to say it, but there are disruptors who are trying to gain attention by saying this is all, fabrication. And that's terribly unfortunate, because our children really are demanding. And more importantly, I think our parents are saying, enough. We need a real science. We need to ensure that our kids are going to be successful in school. So I don't think we can go back. And I'm hoping that's true.
Well, I have spent this week listening to the History of the Science of Reading podcast. If you are not listening to, I don't mean you, Susan.
Yeah,
I mean, everyone else. It's really fascinating how we continue to go back.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, you can't argue, and you can't argue with the data. I remember I had a conversation with a mom with a dyslexic son, and she was going to, she was about to approach a school board. And I had said to her, well, just show up with the data. And she said, and she was spot on. She said, no, they have to show me the data. And I was like, yes, they do. And, we are a data-driven profession. So if we follow the data, we have no choice.
That's right. That's right.
If
Yeah.
I can add sort of two concerns I have to your question, Virginia, I'd say sort of the Minnesotan in me would say 2 potholes in the road, but I don't know if other regions get potholes the way we do every springtime.
I'm from New York, so.
Yeah, my huge so here are two concerns about not so much going back, but people sort of throwing up their hands, right? And just saying they're like, we just can't, catch as catch can, right? Back to local control, everybody pick your own. And so my 2 areas, one, involving families and involving teachers, because families are expecting results. And if they're not seeing them, and they've seen these things get implemented, but like what I'm loving about the chat is there's so many questions, and like we're digging into the weeds of implementation in the chat. And we will not see results if there is not follow through, if there is not implementation, no matter how well the state law is written. And so that is one concern, where families not seeing results and they just throw up their hands and they think like, we don't know what to do anymore. We've advocated for this. We've looked for that. And then the second is teachers. We were really mindful of both of these concerns as this study got built, in that if educators feel like they are being told to do something and like the demands are high, but there is no commensurate support, like we fail at our work then. Like the system fails for not providing the support. It leaves educators just tearing out their hair. Like, you have these incredible demands, and I get it. Like, I am in teaching to meet the needs of kids. That's my day job. I so desperately want to do that, and I want to know how to do it. I want to be supported in doing it. And if we, right, fall through on providing that support commensurate to the expectation we have of educators, again, we will not get the results we expect to get. And then there's this, and so then it's this horrible cycle of educators are frustrated, they're not being supported, parents are frustrated, they're not getting the results they want. Those are the two pitfalls I see that could lead people to just abandon this momentum we have right now, and those concern me. Like, those are real, and I appreciate getting to name them.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that's your biggest point that I appreciate, and that I've like you have put it so succinctly. It's about systemizing, and it is about the support and systemizing the support.
Mhm.
And then
But
it's just
let me add another issue, because I've noticed a couple of people have talked about letters training. And one of the interesting things that we all have to grapple with comes from an example of Mississippi. Mississippi adopted letters as their professional development training, and they trained all the teachers in the state. It was a real consistent and collaborative and cohesive kind of program. But then they found that some things were missing for Mississippi kids, for them and for teachers. So they began to adapt to that professional development to meet the needs of their children in their state. And I think that we have to recognize that science is evolving. It is not static, and it will change for different states and different kids who will need different things. So it's not like we can adopt a particular program and say, gosh, there, we've done it, bravo. We're going to have to constantly review and reflect and do progress monitoring to ensure that the kids that we're dealing with are really progressing. And I think it's an important lesson.
right. And I have to say, Susan, all the work that you have done over many years to advocate for this particular group of students, I've seen it for years.
Oh, thank you, dear.
Yeah. Nicole, is there anything in chats that seems to be sticking out at you that we might want to bring into the larger group? I don't read them. Full disclosure.
We've got folks who have mentioned, we're talking about letters training in the chat. Some folks have brought up the question of assessments and understanding whether we have realistic and reliable assessment results when we're looking at student data, and how do we put that into action in the classroom.
If I could just, I want to build off of Susan's comment, because I actually wrote in the chat to him, like, please hear what she said, that like, as we continue to learn, the National Reading Panel came out 20 years ago, and we have added to it since then. And that is such an important point. And that's, when we, like, it is truly the way we as teachers, we as educators, we as researchers in the field continue to be lifelong learners, right? We learn from the work of others. And this is an incredible opportunity. I think a lot of what we're talking about in the chat is implementation science. There is a science to implementing high quality professional development. So if we are truly dedicated to the science of reading, then let's complement that with a true dedication to the science of implementation. and then see how strong our reading instruction gets, right? There are other sciences out there, and Esther reminds me of this all the time. So Esther, I don't know if you want to speak to this point as well, because I think this is, I think this is something we have an opportunity to bring into this space that increases our chances of success.
Yeah, I mean, just to sort of expand on that idea a little bit that Mary Catherine just talked about, we have we're very interested in how different pieces of education science intersect with the science of reading, because there's a science of professional development, there's a science of implementation. So, you know, one thought is to sort of have you know, lessons learned from sort of these other fields, you know, that are intersecting with the science of reading, that seems to be kind of more focused on, you know, how you teach reading and sort of these, you know, foundational skills and sort of this very, but then the broader education science field really tells us so much that we can't ignore. And I think if we nest the science of reading in these other research areas, then it'll be much more enriched, and it'll be a better conversation.
Agreed.
And the last insight I have too, especially since we clearly have people tonight who understand how comprehensively Mississippi embraced this work. And it's what I actually learned from studying the education system in Finland. If you all remember, about a decade ago, everyone was saying like the Finnish education system has done everything right. Only one of the problems was people would cherry pick what they liked best and said, you know, like, well, this is what Finland did, so let's do this one thing and our system will be like Finland's, you know. And someone else had to say, no, it wasn't that thing, it was this thing Finland did, right? It was universal pre-K, that was what Finland did, let's do that. No, it was all of their teachers came from the top quarter of their graduating class, that's what we should do. And really, when you study the Finnish education system, you realize it is all of these things they did that created the education system they have today. And so there are folks out there who will cherry pick, like, well, Mississippi did this one thing, and so we should do that one thing. No, it's this other thing, the one thing they did. And when you study Mississippi, and they, you know, they had enacted theirs, I believe, in 2013. So they are not in our 2019 to 2022 data. But they, again, you study everything they did, and they did it as a comprehensive reform, not as a sort of one-off. And that's an important lesson to keep offering as we are trying to create this landscape of this learning agenda that says everybody is welcome to strengthen reading instruction in all of these ways.
I'd love to just say one last thing. I think if there's anyone on tonight, I think traditionally people like me in higher ed, we have often been very controversial in our views about the science of reading. And I really urge us in teacher preparation to begin to speak in a collaborative voice, because our children really depend on it, our future teachers to depend on it. And so many teachers will say, well, I don't know anything about the science of reading. I was never taught that. And so I think what we're saying tonight is we need a complete, coherent system involving teacher preparation as well as teacher in service to really ensure that our kids get the kind of instruction they so richly deserve.
What I should have learned in college. You're absolutely right. That's the jumping off point. And if we don't get it right there, then there is no place to go. Is there any, I'd really like each of you to have an opportunity to just give your final thoughts. You know, what would you like to leave us with? Advice? Oh, wait, before we do, y'all, do you know that they were in the New York Times today? Whoop, whoop. It's a good day. It's a good day to be here celebrating.
Yeah.
On that note, sorry, I just interrupted myself. So I would like to give you each an opportunity to, or not, you can just say goodbye and go refill your glass because this is a happy hour. But I will leave it up to you to take us out however you so choose. With my gratitude, by the way, this has been a fantastic learning curve for each and every one of us.
Well, we are grateful. I will just close by saying that plan on looking for our analysis of the 2023 legislation, this last legislative session, sometime later this fall, so that we can add it to these other 4 years and you'll have a more complete picture. Susan, Esther, and Kayla, other thoughts?
I think it's time for all of us to have a drink.
We're meant to be friends, Susan. We're meant to be.
Right.
I'll just say I was pleasantly surprised with the legislation as we were reading it. Someone put in the chat that they were hopeful. I agree with that sentiment. I'm also hopeful with the legislation. I'm also very aware that legislation versus implementation is very different and things get lost in translation, and we must remember that. But overall, I was hopeful.
I'll add a little bit to that. And I emailed some of you directly in the chat to encourage you guys to get in touch, and because we want to hear more, because I think in addition to looking at legislation from 2023, one of the things we want to do, we're thinking of ways of, understanding practitioner voice a little better, practitioner experiences, what's going on on the ground. And so if you, we'd be really happy to talk to you individually, to hear more of what you've shared in the chat, and kind of understand, what the challenges are, and give voice to those issues, because we really care about them. So get in touch.
Thank you. Truly, thank you. I say this all the time. It's about teaching kids to read. So what a tremendous role you have all played in that. And we will all do our part as well. So everyone have a good night, and go refill those glasses. Tita Tito's. Thanks so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
All right.